360 BC, Athens. Timaeus and Critias, a philosopher, records what they've been hiding for 2,000 years. Imagine a single day, one night, the world ends. An island civilization at the height of forbidden power. Gold temples gleaming with secrets the priests tried to bury. Harbors crowded with ships carrying suppressed truths across ancient seas. Then the earth splits. Temples crack, crumble, gone, erased. Tsunamis rise like liquid mountains, swallowing palaces, swallowing ports, swallowing everything. By dawn, an entire civilization has vanished beneath the waves. This is not myth. This is Atlantis. Plato writes it down. He insists this was not allegory, not fiction, history. Real history they deliberately erased. His source? Egyptian priests. Temple of Sais, Lower Egypt, 590 BC. Stone inscriptions carved with forbidden knowledge older than the pyramids themselves. The story of a world that drowned when the gods grew tired of human arrogance. But Atlantis wasn't alone. Egypt recorded it. Temple of Edfu, Upper Egypt, inscribed 237 BC. The deluge that swallowed the ancient world. Just like Atlantis, Mesopotamia preserved it. Tablets at Nippur, southern Iraq, 2100 BC. Waters rising 40 cubits deep, cities drowned. Just like Atlantis, the pattern spreads. India remembered it. The Vedas, oceans swallowing continents. Civilizations buried beneath the seas. Just like Atlantis, the Americas kept it alive. Maya Popol Vuh, Hopi traditions. Aztec codices burned by conquistadors trying to erase the evidence. The same cataclysm, the same forbidden truth. Just like Atlantis. Why does every ancient civilization remember the same destruction? The scholars call it fantasy, political allegory. But what if that dismissal is the real fiction? What if the evidence has been deliberately hidden in texts we were taught to ignore? Tonight, we drift into the depths of that concealment. What really destroyed Atlantis? And why have the answers been suppressed for 9,000 years? Welcome to the Nocturne History, where mystery and sleep walk side by side. This is Mystery History for Sleep, a slow descent through the shadows of the past. Let the noise of the day fall away and follow the clues the textbooks never mentioned, because what they found next changes everything. Now, before we uncover the evidence itself, we need to understand the questions that have shaped this mystery from the beginning. For centuries, scholars dismissed Atlantis as fiction, a philosophical parable, nothing more. But Plato didn't present it as fiction. He framed it as history passed down through Egyptian priests who preserved it in stone. He gave specific dates, 9,000 years before Solon's visit to Egypt in 590 BC. That places the destruction at approximately 9,600 BC, the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose 400 feet and coastlines vanished beneath the waves. He described exact measurements, the capital city's concentric rings, the dimensions of the temples, the agricultural output feeding the population. These aren't the vague details of allegory, they're the specific records of someone describing a real place from preserved accounts. And he insisted repeatedly that this was true. But Plato wasn't alone in recording this catastrophe. Other ancient texts, scattered across continents, written by cultures separated by thousands of miles, describe the exact same event, the same timeline, the same devastating floods, the same loss of an advanced civilization. The pattern emerges in humanity's oldest texts. In Egypt, the Temple of Edfu preserves inscriptions that predate the pharaohs. Carved into stone walls in 237 BC, but the priests claimed that the knowledge came from a time before memory. They called it Zep Tepi, the first time. when gods walked among men before a great deluge destroyed what they called the primeval world. The Edfu building texts give specific details that match Plato's account. Waters rose without warning across the entire world. The dwelling places of men were swept away. Islands that once held cities disappeared beneath the sea. Survivors gathered on the few peaks that remained above the flood, forced to rebuild civilization from fragments of knowledge that had been lost. The texts describe how these survivors carried scrolls and sacred objects to high ground, how they preserved what they could of the old wisdom, how they passed down stories of the world that drowned, hoping future generations would remember what had been destroyed. The timeline matches. Approximately 9,600 BC. The end of the Younger Dryas period when global temperatures rose suddenly and ice sheets collapsed, sending walls of meltwater across continents. The Hermetic texts, compiled from even older Egyptian sources, state it plainly. The waters rose and covered the land. The works of men were swept away. Only those who climbed to the peaks survived to tell of the world that was lost. But Egypt's account is only the beginning. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh preserves the story through Utnapishtim, who survived a flood sent by gods who decided humanity had grown too powerful. The poem was inscribed on clay tablets at Nippur, southern Iraq, around 2100 BC, predating the biblical flood narrative by over 1,000 years. The details are specific. The hero received warning that a deluge was coming. He built a great vessel, gathered his family and animals. When the flood arrived, it raged for 6 days and 7 nights. The waters covered mountains. Cities that had stood for generations vanished in hours. Knowledge accumulated over centuries was lost forever. The Atrahasis epic, found on tablets from the same period, expands the account. The gods grew tired of human noise and human ambition. They decided to wipe the slate clean, to erase what had been built, and start again. Only one man and his family survived to carry forward the memory of what the world had been before the waters came. The Mesopotamian accounts describe something global, not a local river flood. They speak of waters covering the earth itself, of a catastrophe so complete that civilization had to begin again from almost nothing. The timeline aligns with Plato's dating, the end of the Ice Age. The drowning of coastal lowlands where populations had concentrated, the loss of cities now buried beneath hundreds of feet of ocean. Across the vast distance to India, the pattern continues in the Vedic texts. The Matsya Purana tells of Manu, warned by a divine fish that a great flood would destroy the world. He built a boat. When the deluge came, the waters rose so high they covered the peaks of the Himalayas themselves. The world that existed before, with its cities and temples and accumulated wisdom, was swallowed whole beneath the seas. The Shatapatha Brahmana, one of the oldest Vedic texts, describes the same event from another angle. Waters rising without warning, continents drowning, an entire epoch ending in a single cataclysmic event that reshaped the face of the earth and forced the few survivors to rebuild from scattered remnants. These texts speak of knowledge lost in the flood, of wisdom that had been accumulated over ages, preserved in temples and libraries that vanished when the waters came, of survivors struggling to remember what their ancestors had known, passing down fragments through oral tradition because the written records had been destroyed. The evidence spreads even farther. Across the Pacific, the Americas preserved the same memory. The Hopi described the destruction of what they call the Third World by water. Their oral traditions, maintained through countless generations, tell of previous worlds destroyed when humans forgot their spiritual obligations. The Third World drowned. Only those who remained faithful survived the flood to begin again in the Fourth World where we live now. The Aztec Codex Chimalpopoca describes 4 previous ages, 4 previous worlds, each destroyed by catastrophe. The fourth sun, they recorded, ended in flood. The sky came closer to the earth, and in a single day, all was lost. The waters rose and covered the mountains. The Maya Popol Vuh records that the gods destroyed the first humans with a great deluge because they had become corrupt and forgotten their creators. A resinous rain fell from the sky. The earth was darkened, and the rain fell without ceasing, day and night, until the world that had been was washed away. These aren't vague flood myths. They're specific accounts describing global catastrophe. Same timeline, same cause, same result. The complete destruction of an advanced civilization and the loss of ancient knowledge that had taken generations to accumulate. Egyptian priests preserved it in stone, Mesopotamian scribes pressed it into clay, Vedic scholars recorded it in sacred texts, indigenous Americans passed it down through oral tradition that refused to forget, all of them describing the same event. All of them placing it at the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose 400 feet and coastlines that once held thriving populations disappeared beneath the waves. The evidence isn't hidden in obscure sources. It's written plainly in humanity's oldest texts, scattered across every continent. The pattern is undeniable once you look at what they recorded instead of what we've been told to believe about their words. The geological record confirms what the ancient texts describe. Between 10,000 BC and 6,000 BC, ocean levels rose catastrophically. Continental shelves where millions could have lived now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water as ocean floor. Underwater archaeology has found structures off the coasts of Cuba, the Bahamas, India, Japan, stone architecture, geometric formations, features that shouldn't exist if human civilization only began 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia's river valleys, but exploration of these sites remains limited. Funding dries up, expeditions are canceled, discoveries are dismissed without proper investigation. The ancient texts all point to the same conclusion. Atlantis was real. Its destruction was recorded by survivors who scattered to Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and the Americas. They carried the same story, the same terrible memory, the same warning about what can be lost when the earth itself convulses and the seas rise to swallow what humanity has built. Plato's account was an allegory. It was history preserved through Egyptian priests who had maintained the records for 9,000 years. The question isn't whether Atlantis existed. The question is, what force could cause such complete destruction? What could drown an entire civilization in a single day and night, raising sea levels 400 feet and reshaping the continents themselves? Athens, 360 BC. 2 dialogues that would spark controversy for over 2,000 years, Timaeus and Critias. Written by Plato near the end of his life, these texts contain the only detailed surviving account of Atlantis from the ancient world. Every other reference to the lost civilization traces back to these pages. Every theory, every expedition, every claim about Atlantis begins here, with the words Plato recorded in careful Greek prose. But Plato didn't claim to have invented this story. He insisted it came from his ancestor Solon, one of Athens' greatest lawmakers, who had traveled to Egypt over 2 centuries earlier. And Solon, according to Plato's account, had received it from Egyptian priests who preserved records dating back 9,000 years before their own time. The dialogue begins with Critias, Plato's great-grandfather, recounting a tale passed down through their family. He describes how Solon journeyed to Sais in Lower Egypt around 590 BC, seeking wisdom from a culture far older than Greece. The Egyptian priests welcomed him into their temple, a place where knowledge had been preserved in stone inscriptions for millennia. According to Plato's account, the priests told Solon that the Greeks were like children, knowing nothing of true antiquity. "You Greeks are all young in soul, they said. You have no belief rooted in old tradition and no knowledge gray with age. The priests explained that catastrophes periodically destroyed civilizations. Floods and fires swept across the earth in cycles, erasing most of what humanity had built. Only Egypt, protected by the Nile's unique geography, had managed to preserve continuous records stretching back to times the Greeks had completely forgotten. Then they told Solon about Atlantis, 9,000 years before his visit, placing the events at approximately 9,600 BC. There had existed a powerful island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar. This island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, controlled a vast territory and threatened to conquer the entire Mediterranean world. Plato's description of Atlantis itself is remarkably specific for what scholars claim is pure invention. The island sat in the Atlantic Ocean, just beyond the strait that marked the edge of the known world. At its center stood the capital city, designed in concentric rings of land and water. The innermost island, where the royal palace stood, measured 5 stadia in diameter, roughly half a mile across. Alternating rings of water and land surrounded it, each separated by walls covered in metals that gleamed in the sun. The outermost wall, Plato wrote, was coated in brass. The middle wall shone with tin. The inner wall surrounding the central island blazed with orichalcum, a precious metal that glowed like fire and was second only to gold in value. This metal, according to Plato, was mined from the earth of Atlantis itself, but has since vanished from human knowledge. The city's harbor bustled with ships from across the ancient world. 3 circular canals connected the rings of water, allowing vessels to sail from the ocean directly to the inner harbor at the city's heart. Bridges spanned the rings of land, with towers and gates protecting each passage. The scale of the construction suggested engineering capabilities that rivaled anything built in Plato's own time. Beyond the capital, Plato described an island of incredible fertility. A great plain stretched across the southern part of Atlantis, measuring 3,000 stadia by 2,000 stadia, roughly 340 by 230 miles. Mountains sheltered this plain from the north winds. Springs of hot and cold water flowed from the earth. The soil produced 2 harvests per year, fed by winter rains and summer irrigation from an elaborate canal system. The Atlanteans cultivated this plain with mathematical precision. They divided it into 60,000 squares, each assigned to provide men and supplies for the military. Every square was obligated to contribute 1 chariot, horses, soldiers, and provisions for war. The total military force this system could marshal, according to Plato's calculations, included 1,200 ships and 12,000 chariots. The government of Atlantis was hereditary monarchy, shared among 10 kings, descendants of Poseidon himself according to their mythology. These kings ruled their own territories but met regularly to discuss common affairs and render judgment according to laws inscribed on a pillar of orichalcum that stood in Poseidon's temple at the city's center. The temple itself, Plato wrote, was a wonder. Its exterior was covered entirely in silver with pinnacles of gold. Inside, the ceiling was made of ivory adorned with gold, silver, and orichalcum. A massive statue of Poseidon, driving a chariot pulled by winged horses, stood at the center, so tall it nearly touched the ceiling. 100 Nereids riding dolphins surrounded the god. This level of detail, specific measurements, precise descriptions of architecture and governance, careful enumeration of military resources, seems unusual for a simple philosophical allegory. Plato provides numbers that could be checked, describes systems that could be analyzed, offers details that invite verification rather than abstract interpretation. He also describes Atlantean society with a complexity that suggests a real culture rather than an invented utopia. The Atlanteans, according to the account, were initially virtuous. They possessed wisdom and self-control. They valued virtue over material wealth, even though they had access to resources beyond measure. Gold and precious metals seemed common to them, and they used them casually for practical purposes rather than hoarding them as treasures. But over generations, this virtue degraded. The divine portion of their nature, inherited from their ancestor Poseidon, became diluted through repeated mixing with mortal characteristics. Human nature gained the upper hand. The Atlanteans grew ambitious. They became aggressive. They began to view their military might as a tool for conquest rather than defense. Zeus, observing their moral decline, decided to punish them. He called together the gods to pronounce judgment on Atlantis. And here, frustratingly, Plato's account breaks off. The Critias dialogue ends mid-sentence, never revealing what specific punishment Zeus decreed. But the Timaeus dialogue, written as a prequel to Critias, provides the outcome. Atlantis attacked Athens and the other cities of the Mediterranean. The Athenians, despite being vastly outnumbered, fought back and managed to halt the Atlantean advance. Then, in a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, Atlantis itself was swallowed by the sea and disappeared beneath the waves. The Egyptian priests told Solon that the ocean remained impassable in that region for years afterward because of shallow mud left by the sunken island. Ships could no longer sail those waters. The civilization that had threatened to conquer the known world vanished so completely that within generations it became a legend rather than history. Plato presents all of this as fact, not fiction. He has Critias swear that the account is altogether true, emphasizing that it's not an invented fable but genuine history. The dialogue's framing device, a story passed from Egyptian priests to Solon to Plato's family, serves to establish a chain of transmission for historical information, not to signal allegorical intent. Yet scholars have dismissed it as allegory for over 2,000 years. The standard interpretation claims Plato invented Atlantis to illustrate his political philosophy. The virtuous early Atlanteans represent his ideal republic. Their moral decline demonstrates what happens when a society abandons virtue for military ambition. The destruction serves as divine punishment for hubris, a common theme in Greek literature. This interpretation has become so entrenched in academic thought that proposing Atlantis might have been real remains professional suicide for archaeologists and historians. Careers have ended over taking Plato's account seriously as potential history rather than proven fiction. But the dismissal rests on assumptions rather than evidence. The primary argument against Atlantis's reality is the lack of archaeological evidence for such a civilization. But this argument assumes we would have found evidence by now, despite the fact that we've explored less than 5% of the ocean floor. It assumes that a civilization destroyed in 9600 BC would leave traces easily visible today, despite knowing that sea levels have risen 400 feet since then, submerging vast continental shelves where Ice Age populations would have concentrated. The second argument claims the timeline is impossible. Advanced civilization, according to mainstream archaeology, didn't exist in 9600 BC. Humans were hunter-gatherers. Agriculture hadn't been invented. Cities wouldn't emerge for another 5,000 years. But this argument has weakened considerably in recent decades. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to 9600 BC, exactly Plato's timeline for Atlantis, shows evidence of organized labor, architectural sophistication, and symbolic art that wasn't supposed to exist for thousands of years. The site required hundreds of workers, suggesting social organization more complex than scattered hunter-gatherer bands. Underwater discoveries continue to challenge the official timeline. Stone structures off the coast of India near Dwarka, submerged ruins off Cuba, and the Bahamas Yonaguni Monument off Japan all suggest human construction in periods when, according to standard chronology, no advanced civilizations existed. Yet scholars have dismissed Plato's account as pure allegory for over 2,000 years. The standard interpretation claims he invented Atlantis to illustrate political philosophy, a virtuous society corrupted by ambition, destroyed by divine punishment for hubris. This reading has become so entrenched in academic thought that proposing Atlantis as potential history remains professional suicide for archaeologists. Careers have ended over taking these dialogues seriously as preserved records rather than proven fiction. But the dismissal rests on circular reasoning rather than evidence. Atlantis couldn't have existed, the argument goes, because advanced civilization didn't exist in 9600 BC. We know advanced civilization didn't exist then because we haven't found evidence of it. We haven't found evidence because we haven't looked beneath 400 feet of risen seawater that now covers the continental shelves where Ice Age populations would have concentrated. The timeline argument has weakened considerably in recent decades. Göbekli Tepe stands as direct contradiction, dated to 9600 BC, exactly Plato's timeline for Atlantis, showing organized labor and architectural sophistication that wasn't supposed to exist for another 5,000 years. The site required hundreds of workers, suggesting social complexity far beyond scattered hunter-gatherer bands. Plato himself didn't frame Atlantis as allegory. He wrote obvious myths elsewhere, the allegory of the cave, the myth of and labeled them as such. But with Atlantis, he insisted repeatedly, altogether true, genuine history, not invented fable. He provided a specific chain of transmission from Egyptian priests to Solon to Dropides to Critias, documenting sources the way historians do, not philosophers crafting parables. The Critias dialogue breaks off mid-sentence, never completed. If Plato were freely inventing Atlantis for philosophical purposes, why leave the story unfinished? The abrupt ending suggests he may have been working from limited source material, constrained by what the Egyptian records actually contained, rather than his own imagination. The question isn't whether Plato's account proves Atlantis existed. Ancient texts require verification through physical evidence. But his account shouldn't be dismissed as obvious fiction simply because it challenges established chronology. He provided testable claims: a location beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, concentric ring architecture, destruction by earthquake and flood around 9600 BC. These details offer starting points for investigation rather than reasons for automatic dismissal. To move from textual clues to physical evidence, we must now examine whether Earth's geological record supports the catastrophic events Plato described. Plato's account provides the framework: a civilization destroyed by catastrophic earthquake and flood at the end of the Ice Age. But did the Earth itself record this catastrophe? The geological evidence tells a story mainstream science has struggled to explain. The Earth remembers what humanity has forgotten. Locked in ice cores drilled from Greenland's glaciers, preserved in sediment layers at the bottom of ancient lakes, recorded in the sudden disappearance of species that had thrived for millennia. The geological record tells a story of catastrophic change at precisely the time Plato specified for Atlantis's destruction. Around 9600 BC, the planet experienced upheaval on a scale difficult to comprehend. Temperatures spiked suddenly after 12,000 years of Ice Age cold. Massive ice sheets that had covered North America and Europe for tens of thousands of years began collapsing. Sea levels rose 400 feet over the following millennia, drowning coastlines where human populations had concentrated during the Ice Age. This wasn't gradual change. The geological evidence points to sudden, violent transformation. Ice core data from Greenland reveals the end of the Younger Dryas period, a 1,000-year return to Ice Age conditions that ended abruptly around 9700 BC. Temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere jumped by 15 degrees Fahrenheit in less than a decade. In some regions, the warming happened even faster, with temperature increases of 10 degrees occurring within just 3 years. This rapid warming triggered cascading catastrophes across the planet. The Laurentide ice sheet covering North America, in some places 2 miles thick, began breaking apart. Massive ice dams holding back glacial lakes suddenly failed, releasing floods of unimaginable scale. Lake Agassiz alone contained more water than all of North America's current Great Lakes combined. When its ice dam broke, it sent this water roaring toward the ocean in a deluge that would have raised global sea levels by itself. The channeled scablands of Washington state preserve evidence of these megafloods. Coulees carved hundreds of feet deep into solid bedrock. Boulders the size of houses carried dozens of miles from their origin points. Gravel bars standing 200 feet high. The landscape shows unmistakable signs of water moving at catastrophic velocities, stripping away everything in its path. Geologist J. Harlan Bretz spent decades studying the scablands, concluding that only a flood of biblical proportions could have created these features. His calculations suggested water depths of 400 feet moving at 60 miles per hour across an area of 15,000 square miles. The mainstream geological community initially rejected his findings because they implied catastrophic flooding on a scale their gradualist models couldn't accommodate. Decades later, the evidence forced acceptance of his conclusions. But the scablands represent just one regional flood among many that occurred as the Ice Age ended. Similar flood features exist across Siberia, where mammoth carcasses were found frozen with undigested food still in their stomachs, suggesting death so sudden they didn't have time to swallow their last meal. The permafrost that preserved these animals contains layers of broken trees, animal remains, and sediment jumbled together as if swept up by massive flooding and then frozen in place. The Black Sea provides another example of catastrophic flooding from this period. Around 5600 BC, several thousand years after the initial ice sheet collapse, the Mediterranean Sea broke through the Bosporus Strait with such force that it poured into the Black Sea basin like a waterfall. The Black Sea's water level rose hundreds of feet, flooding approximately 60,000 square miles of coastal lowlands where human settlements had existed. Archaeological evidence suggests these flooded areas had been inhabited, supporting the theory that this event may have inspired the flood narratives preserved in Mesopotamian texts. Core samples from the Black Sea floor show a clear boundary layer marking the transition from freshwater lake to saltwater sea. Below this layer, freshwater mollusks. Above it, saltwater species. The transition happened suddenly, not gradually, consistent with catastrophic flooding rather than slow sea level rise. The flooding wasn't limited to these dramatic regional events. Global sea levels rose 400 feet between 10,000 BC and 6,000 BC as ice sheets melted. This rise submerged vast continental shelves that had been exposed during the Ice Age when water was locked up in glaciers. The continental shelf off the eastern coast of North America extends up to 200 miles from the current shoreline. During the Ice Age, this entire area was dry land, a coastal plain where humans and animals would have lived. The same pattern exists off every continent. Millions of square miles of formerly habitable land now lie beneath ocean waters ranging from a few dozen to several hundred feet deep. If advanced civilizations existed during the Ice Age, they would have built their cities on these now submerged coastal plains where resources were abundant and climate was moderate. The rising seas would have swallowed their cities completely, leaving them inaccessible beneath depths that make archaeological investigation extremely difficult. Underwater archaeology has found intriguing structures in several of these flooded areas. Off the coast of Cuba, near the Guanahacabibs Peninsula, sonar surveys in 2001 detected geometric formations at depths of 2,000 feet. The sonar images showed what appeared to be symmetrical stone structures arranged in patterns suggesting human construction. Rectangles, pyramids, and circular formations spread across an area of several square miles. The discovery team, including marine engineer Paulina Zalitsky, reported finding stones that appeared cut and placed in specific configurations. The depth presents a challenge to conventional chronology. For these structures to have been built on dry land, sea levels would need to have been 2,000 feet lower than today, placing construction well before the end of the last ice age, perhaps 50,000 years ago or more. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed the findings as natural geological formations without conducting detailed investigation. The depth makes exploration prohibitively expensive, and funding for expeditions to examine the site has been denied repeatedly. The formations remain unexplored beyond the initial sonar surveys, their nature unresolved. Off the western coast of Cuba, in shallower water near the Isle of Youth, divers have reported finding megalithic structures, including what appears to be stone circles and aligned blocks. These structures lie at depths, suggesting they were built when sea levels were much lower than today, potentially during or just after the Ice Age. The Bimini Road off the Bahamas presents another controversial underwater formation. Discovered in 1968, it consists of rectangular limestone blocks aligned in a half-mile-long formation that resembles a road or wall. The blocks appear too regular and too well-fitted to be natural formations, with some showing what look like tool marks. They rest at depths of 15 to 20 feet, suggesting they were constructed when sea levels were lower. Geologists have argued that the Bimini Road is simply fractured beach rock, limestone, that formed naturally and broke along natural joint patterns. But researchers, including Dr. Greg Little, have documented features difficult to reconcile with this explanation, including blocks that appear to have been moved and stacked, pillars standing upright in the sand, and anchor stones with holes that suggest they were used for mooring vessels. Core samples taken from beneath the blocks revealed solid bedrock, indicating the blocks were placed on top of the ancient surface rather than forming naturally in place. Dating of the formation remains contested, but estimates place it between 10,000 and 15,000 years old based on the sea level required for construction on dry land. Off the coast of India, near the Gulf of Kambat, acoustic imaging in 2001 revealed extensive formations at depths of 120 feet, covering an area of 3 square miles. Side-scan sonar showed grid patterns, geometric structures, and what appeared to be building foundations. Artifacts recovered from the site by the National Institute of Ocean Technology included fossilized wood dated to 7500 BC and ceramic materials. The Indian government's initial response showed interest, with plans for thorough investigation. But international archaeological institutions questioned the findings, and detailed excavation never materialized. The site remains largely unexplored, with only the initial surveys providing tantalizing hints of what might lie beneath the sediment. Japan's Yonaguni Monument presents perhaps the most controversial underwater structure. Discovered in 1987 off the coast of Yonaguni Island, the formation consists of massive stone blocks arranged in terraces, platforms, and right-angled corners. The main structure rises nearly 90 feet from the seabed, with features including what appear to be steps, passages, and carved faces. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura spent years studying the formation, concluding it showed clear evidence of human modification. He documented tool marks, post holes, and alignments too precise to be natural. The structure's depth and position suggest it was built when sea levels were much lower, potentially 10,000 years ago or earlier. Mainstream archaeology largely dismisses Yonaguni as a natural formation shaped by tectonic activity and erosion. Dr. Robert Schoch, after diving at the site, argued that while some features might suggest human enhancement of natural structures, the formation is primarily geological. The debate continues, with the site protected by the Japanese government but not officially recognized as an archaeological location. These underwater formations share a pattern. They exist at depths requiring construction during lower sea levels. They show geometric features proponents argue indicate human design. Mainstream archaeology dismisses them as natural formations shaped by erosion and tectonic activity. The debate continues because detailed investigation remains prohibitively expensive, and funding for expeditions that challenge established chronology faces institutional resistance. The pattern extends beyond underwater structures. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe stands at exactly Plato's timeline, 9600 BC, showing organized labor and sophisticated stoneworking that wasn't supposed to exist among hunter-gatherers. The site was deliberately buried around 8,000 BC, covered with thousands of tons of fill dirt, suggesting intentional preservation or concealment. What the geological evidence provides is the mechanism for Atlantis's destruction. Sudden climate change at 9600 BC, collapsing ice sheets releasing megafloods, sea levels rising 400 feet over the following millennia, tectonic upheaval as Earth's crust adjusted to massive weight shifts from melting glaciers. These weren't gradual processes humans could adapt to over generations. They were catastrophes striking within lifetimes, sometimes within years or even days. Populations living on coastal plains would have faced rising waters steadily drowning their lands. Communities near ice sheets would have experienced floods beyond imagination as ice dams failed and released lakes the size of modern seas. The ice cores remember it, the sediment layers preserve it, the submerged continental shelves testify to it. The Earth itself recorded the catastrophe at precisely the time Plato specified. Mainstream geology treats the Ice Age's end as gradual process affecting only scattered hunter-gatherers. But this assumes we've found all evidence of early civilization, that anything built before 1600 BC would still be visible on land rather than submerged beneath 400 feet of risen ocean, that catastrophic flooding wouldn't have erased most traces of Ice Age settlements. The geological record confirms the catastrophe occurred at Plato's timeline. The mechanism existed for a coastal civilization to be destroyed exactly as he described. But geology provides only half the story, the physical evidence of what happened to Earth. To understand what happened to humanity during these catastrophes, we must turn to the ancient texts that claim to remember it, the accounts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and the Americas describing the same destruction Plato recorded. The priests spoke in the darkness of their temple chambers, carved into stone walls where sunlight barely reached, preserved on clay tablets pressed by trembling hands, recorded in sacred texts passed down through generations of memorization. The ancient world kept meticulous accounts of the catastrophe that destroyed their predecessors. Specific testimonies describing global destruction, preserved by cultures separated by oceans and millennia, all telling the same story from different shores. The pattern begins in Egypt, where the oldest continuous civilization maintained records stretching back to times the Greeks had completely forgotten. The Temple of Edfu in Upper Egypt preserves what scholars call the Edfu building texts, inscribed on stone walls during the Ptolemaic period around 237 BC, but claiming to record knowledge from the first time Zep Tepi, when gods walked among men before a great cataclysm reshaped the world. These texts describe a primeval island where divine beings established the first civilization. They speak of the homeland of the primeval ones, a place of great wisdom and power that existed before Egypt itself. According to the inscriptions, this homeland was destroyed when the waters rose and the dwelling places of the ancestors were swept away. The texts give specific details about what was lost. Libraries containing accumulated wisdom, temples where sacred knowledge was preserved, cities built according to divine plans, all of it swallowed by water that came without warning and covered the place where the first gods lived. The survivors, according to Edfu, scattered to different lands carrying fragments of the lost knowledge. Some came to Egypt, where they taught the primitive inhabitants agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and writing. They built temples aligned with celestial bodies. They established mystery schools to preserve what they could of the wisdom that had been destroyed. The timeline the Edfu texts suggest places this catastrophe at the end of the Ice Age, when Egypt was not the desert we know today, but a fertile land with abundant rainfall and vast lakes. The destruction they describe matches the geological evidence of rapid climate change and rising sea levels around 9600 BC. The Hermetic texts, compiled from older Egyptian sources during the Hellenistic period, echo this account with haunting precision. The Corpus Hermeticum describes how the waters rose and covered the land in a catastrophe that destroyed the works of the early civilization. The Asclepius text speaks of a time when Egypt was an image of heaven before a great flood changed everything. These weren't literary inventions. The Egyptian priests who preserved these texts maintained continuous records for over 3,000 years. They distinguished between mythology and history. When they told Solon about Atlantis, they presented it as genuine history passed down from their predecessors who had witnessed the event. The Papyrus of Ipuwer, dated to the Middle Kingdom but possibly recording older traditions, describes catastrophic upheaval. The land turns round, as does a potter's wheel. The towns are destroyed. Upper Egypt has become waste. While some scholars interpret this as political chaos, others see descriptions of natural catastrophe matching the scale of Ice Age flooding. But Egypt's testimony stands as just one voice in a global chorus. In Mesopotamia, the oldest written accounts of the flood predate the biblical narrative by over 1,000 years, carved into clay tablets that survived in the ruins of ancient libraries. The Epic of Gilgamesh, inscribed at Nippur in southern Iraq around 2100 BC, preserves the account through Utnapishtim, the man who survived when the gods decided to destroy humanity with a deluge. The poem doesn't present this as myth, but as history passed down from the survivor himself. Utnapishtim describes receiving warning that a catastrophic flood was coming. He built a great vessel, sealed it with pitch, loaded it with his family and animals. When the flood arrived, it came with such violence that even the gods were frightened by the deluge. The waters rose for 6 days and 7 nights. Mountains disappeared beneath the waves. Cities that had stood for generations vanished in hours. The description is visceral and specific. The gods cowered like dogs at the flood's ferocity. The surface of the earth became a flat field covered by water. When the flood finally receded, Utnapishtim's vessel came to rest on a mountain peak. He released birds to search for dry land. First a dove, then a swallow, finally a raven that didn't return, indicating the waters had receded enough for life to resume. The Atrahasis epic, found on tablets from the same period, expands the account with even more detail about what preceded the flood. It describes a world where human civilization had grown powerful and numerous. The gods, disturbed by human ambition and the noise of expanding cities, decided to wipe the slate clean and start again. The text presents this not as divine caprice, but as deliberate judgment on a civilization that had overreached. The flood, according to Atrahasis, was meant to erase what humanity had built and force survivors to begin from nothing, forgetting the knowledge and power their ancestors had accumulated. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest Sumerian texts, places the flood at the end of a long period of civilization development. It describes kingship descending from heaven, cities being founded, and civilization flourishing before the gods decided to destroy it with water. The survivor in this version, Ziusudra, preserved himself and animals in a boat, then re-established civilization after the waters receded. These Mesopotamian accounts weren't considered mythology by those who recorded them. They were presented as genuine history, the story of how civilization had to restart after a catastrophe that destroyed the earlier world. The texts were copied and recopied for over 2,000 years, treated as sacred historical records rather than fictional tales. The timeline these texts suggest matches Plato's dating. The flood occurred at the end of a period of civilization development, destroying cities and accumulated knowledge. Survivors scattered to different regions, carrying with them fragments of what had been lost. The descriptions of rising water, mountains covered by floods, and the complete destruction of the pre-flood world align with the geological evidence of Ice Age sea level rise. Across vast distance in India, the pattern continues in sacred texts claiming to preserve memories from before recorded history. The Matsya Purana tells of Manu, the progenitor of humanity, who received warning from a divine fish that a great flood would destroy the world. The fish instructed him to build a boat and gather the 7 sages along with seeds of all plants and pairs of all animals. When the deluge came, the waters rose so high they covered even the peaks of the Himalayas. The description emphasizes the flood's global scale. This wasn't a local river overflow, but a catastrophe that covered the 3 worlds: earth, atmosphere, and heaven. The waters rose without cease until all creatures, both moving and stationary, were destroyed, except those Manu had preserved. After the flood subsided, Manu and the sages had to re-establish civilization from what they had saved. They spread across the land, teaching agriculture, establishing social order, and passing down the knowledge that had been preserved. The text presents this as the origin of the current cycle of civilization, built on remnants salvaged from the Shatapatha Brahmana, one of the oldest Vedic texts, gives an alternate version emphasizing the sacrifice and ritual knowledge Manu preserved through the catastrophe. It describes how he performed sacrifices after the flood to regenerate life and restore order to the world. The text treats this as a historical event that shaped the ritual traditions still practiced when the Brahmana was compiled. The Bhagavata Purana adds details about what was lost in the flood, specifically mentioning the Vedas themselves being recovered from the ocean after the deluge, suggesting that sacred knowledge had to be rescued from the waters that destroyed the previous world. These Indian texts place the flood at the beginning of the current age, the Kali Yuga, following destruction of a more spiritually advanced civilization. The timeline, expressed in mythological cycles rather than linear years, suggests catastrophe at the Ice Age's end, followed by slow rebuilding. Across the Pacific, in the Americas, the pattern continues in cultures that had no contact with the Old World. The Hopi describe the destruction of the Third World by water, preserved through countless generations without writing. The Third World had grown corrupt. People forgot spiritual obligations and pursued material power. The Creator decided to destroy this world and allow only the faithful to survive. The flood came suddenly. Water rose from below and rained from above. The Third World was completely destroyed. Only a small group survived by climbing into hollow reeds that floated on rising waters. When the flood receded, these survivors emerged into the Fourth World, our current world, and rebuilt civilization from what little they remembered. The Hopi treat this as literal history passed down through their lineages, explaining why their people follow specific rituals meant to prevent the mistakes that led to the Third World's destruction. The Aztec Codex Chimalpopoca describes similar catastrophe as the end of the fourth sun. the fourth age of the world. The sky came closer to the earth, and in a single day, all was lost. The people were transformed into fish as water covered the land. The destruction was so complete that a new sun had to be created to begin the fifth sun, the current age. The text emphasizes that knowledge from the previous age was deliberately hidden or lost. Only fragments survived, carried by the few who escaped the catastrophe. The Maya Popol Vuh gives the most detailed Mesoamerican account. The gods destroyed the first humans with a great deluge because they had become corrupt and forgotten their creators. A resinous rain fell from the sky. The earth was darkened and the rain fell without ceasing, day and night. The description is apocalyptic. The face of the earth was obscured. A black rain began to fall, rain by day and rain by night. Everything was destroyed. Houses, people, animals, tools. The few who survived fled to the mountains, but even there they found no refuge. The flood pursued them, reaching even the highest peaks. After the waters receded, the gods created new humans, the current Maya people, from corn. But the text makes clear that flood survivors carried forward some knowledge from the destroyed world, teaching the new humans agriculture, astronomy, and the calendar systems that would become central to Maya civilization. The Inca preserved similar traditions despite lacking written records. Spanish chroniclers recorded Inca legends of Viracocha emerging from Lake Titicaca after a great flood destroyed the previous world. He found survivors scattered in the mountains and taught them civilization, how to build, farm, and organize society. The Inca believed their empire was built on foundations laid by these flood survivors. In China, the Gunyu flood myth describes Emperor Yao facing catastrophic flooding that covered the land for generations. Gun attempted to stop the waters by building dams, but failed. His son Yu succeeded by dredging channels to drain the floodwaters into the sea. The account places this at the founding of Chinese civilization, with Yu becoming the first emperor of the Xia dynasty around 2200 BC. But the myth itself may preserve memories of earlier catastrophic flooding. Australian Aboriginal traditions from multiple tribal groups describe a time when the sea rose and drowned the coastal lands where their ancestors had lived. The Yolngu people of Arnhem Land speak of the sea flooding in and covering the plains, forcing their ancestors to move to higher ground. These oral traditions, maintained for thousands of years, align with geological evidence of post-Ice Age sea level rise, drowning the Sahul continental shelf that once connected Australia to New Guinea and Tasmania. From Egypt on the Mediterranean to Mesopotamia on the Tigris and Euphrates, from India on the subcontinent to the Americas, China, and Australia, societies separated by oceans preserved accounts of catastrophic flooding at the boundary between ages. These accounts describe global catastrophe, not local disaster. They mark the end of an earlier civilization and the beginning of the current one. They describe destruction of accumulated knowledge, requiring civilization to rebuild from fragments. They share structural elements: warning before the flood, vessel or refuge prepared, animals preserved, landing on mountain peaks, birds released to find dry land, sacrifice after waters recede. The Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Indian, and American accounts were central to how these cultures understood their origins. They explained why civilization had to be rebuilt, why certain knowledge was lost, why the gods had intervened. These were foundational narratives, preserved with the same care as genealogies and historical records. When Plato recorded the Atlantis account from Egyptian priests, he tapped into this global tradition. His version specifies the date 9600 BC and location beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, but the core story matches what cultures worldwide preserved: an advanced civilization destroyed by catastrophic flooding at the Ice Age's end. The texts describe what was lost: libraries and temples containing accumulated wisdom, cities built according to advanced plans, technologies and knowledge that had taken generations to develop. All of it swallowed by water in a catastrophe so sudden that only scattered refugees survived to carry forward fragments of what their world had been. The geological record shows the mechanism: collapsing ice sheets, megafloods, rising seas. The ancient texts show the experience, witnessing the destruction of coastal civilizations, fleeing rising waters, preserving what knowledge they could, passing down accounts of the world that drowned. But if these accounts preserve genuine memories of a destroyed civilization, physical evidence should exist. The texts describe cities, temples, monuments built by the pre-flood world. If Atlantis or any Ice Age civilization achieved the sophistication these accounts suggest, they would have left traces, structures massive enough to survive the catastrophe, built with techniques that mark them as products of advanced knowledge. The question becomes, do such structures exist? And if they do, where are they? What do they reveal about who built them? And why does their existence remain so controversial? To explore these lingering questions, researchers have proposed multiple possible locations for Atlantis, each offering different clues. The search for Atlantis has consumed explorers, archaeologists, and amateur theorists for over 2,000 years. Plato placed it beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, in the Atlantic Ocean. But without precise coordinates, and with 400 feet of sea level rise since the Ice Age, the actual location remains one of history's most debated mysteries. Dozens of locations have been proposed. Some fit Plato's geographic description, others match his timeline. A few align with the archaeological evidence. But each theory faces challenges that prevent definitive proof. The question isn't whether Atlantis existed. The ancient texts and geological evidence confirm a catastrophic event destroyed coastal civilizations around 9600 BC. The question is which specific location matches all the criteria Plato provided and the patterns preserved in flood narratives across cultures. The Mediterranean hypothesis places Atlantis much closer to Greece than Plato specified, but offers the most extensively studied archaeological evidence. The island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea experienced one of history's most violent volcanic eruptions around 1600 BC. The Minoan civilization thriving there was obliterated. The explosion generated tsunamis that devastated coastal settlements across the Mediterranean. Ash darkened the skies. The center of the island collapsed into the sea, leaving a crescent-shaped remnant surrounding a flooded caldera. The Minoans possessed advanced architecture, sophisticated art, and complex urban planning. Their palace at Knossos featured multi-story buildings, indoor plumbing, and elaborate frescoes. Their ships controlled Mediterranean trade routes. In many ways, they matched the advanced civilization Plato described. Archaeologist Spiridon Marinatos proposed in 1939 that Santorini's eruption inspired the Atlantis account. The theory gained support from discoveries showing how completely the eruption destroyed Minoan settlements. The buried city of Akrotiri revealed sophisticated urban planning frozen in volcanic ash, multi-story buildings, advanced drainage systems, vibrant wall paintings depicting a prosperous maritime culture. The timeline destroys the theory. Plato specifically dated Atlantis to 9600 BC. The eruption occurred in 1600 BC. The location contradicts Plato's description. Santorini lies inside the Mediterranean, not beyond the Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic, as he clearly stated. Because of these contradictions, attention shifts westward into the Atlantic, where new theories attempt to match Plato's geography. Proponents argue Plato or his Egyptian sources confused the timeline, or that later scribes copying the manuscripts added extra zeros, changing 900 years to 9,000. But this requires assuming multiple errors in carefully preserved texts that match geological and cultural evidence from the actual Ice Age period. The Atlantic hypotheses place Atlantis, where Plato said, in the ocean beyond Gibraltar, but face challenges of ocean depth and limited archaeological evidence. The Azores Islands rise from the mid-Atlantic ridge roughly 900 miles west of Portugal. During the Ice Age, lower sea levels would have exposed more land in this region. The islands sit on a geologically active zone where tectonic plates meet, providing a mechanism for sudden submersion through earthquake and volcanic activity. Ignatius Donnelly's 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, popularized the Azores theory, arguing that Atlantis was a large landmass in the Atlantic that served as a cultural bridge between the Old and New worlds. He pointed to similarities in pyramids, flood myths, and agricultural practices across Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica as evidence of shared Atlantean heritage. The theory appeals because it matches Plato's geographic description and provides a central location that could have influenced cultures on both sides of the Atlantic. The Azores also show evidence of volcanic activity and tectonic upheaval consistent with catastrophic destruction. Ocean floor surveys shattered the hypothesis. No large landmass existed at the Azores location even during Ice Age low sea levels. The mid-Atlantic ridge has been rising from the ocean floor for millions of years, not sinking. Any island large enough to support Plato's described civilization would have left detectable traces on the seafloor. None have been found despite extensive mapping. With no evidence found near the Azores, some researchers turn toward other regions of the Atlantic where mysterious underwater formations have been reported. The Caribbean theory gained attention from underwater discoveries suggesting possible human structures in unexpectedly deep water. In 2001, Advanced Digital Communications conducted sonar surveys off Cuba's western coast near the Guanacabibes Peninsula. At depths of 2,000 feet, their equipment detected geometric formations, symmetrical stone structures arranged in patterns suggesting urban planning. The sonar images showed what appeared to be pyramids, rectangles, and circular formations spread across several square miles. Marine engineer Paulina Zalitsky led expeditions that used robot submarines to capture video of the formations. The footage showed stone blocks with right angles and smooth surfaces that appeared deliberately shaped and positioned. Some blocks seemed to have markings or carvings, though the depth and water clarity made detailed analysis difficult. For structures to have been built at current water depth, they would need to date to when sea levels were 2,000 feet lower, placing construction potentially 50,000 years ago or more. This timeline challenges conventional chronology even more dramatically than Plato's 9600 BC date. The academic response was immediate dismissal. Mainstream archaeologists called them natural geological formations shaped by tectonic activity and erosion. Funding for thorough exploration was denied. The formations remain largely unexplored beyond initial surveys, their nature unresolved. The Bimini Road off the Bahamas presents a similar enigma. Discovered in 1968, it consists of rectangular limestone blocks aligned in formations resembling roads or walls at depths of 15 to 20 feet. The blocks appear too regular and well-fitted to be natural, with some showing what look like tool marks and deliberate shaping. Geologist Robert Schoch offered a natural explanation. Beach rock, naturally formed limestone that fractured along joint patterns. But researchers including Greg Little documented features difficult to reconcile with natural formation. Blocks appearing to have been moved and stacked, upright pillars standing in sand, anchor stones with holes suggesting use for mooring vessels. Core samples taken beneath the blocks revealed solid bedrock, indicating the blocks rest on top of the ancient surface rather than forming naturally in place. If the road was constructed on dry land, sea levels would need to have been much lower, suggesting construction during or shortly after the Ice Age. If Atlantis did not sink beneath the ocean, another possibility emerges, placing the lost civilization on land instead of underwater. The Africa hypothesis places Atlantis on land rather than beneath the ocean, preserved in plain sight in the Sahara Desert. The Richat structure in Mauritania, known as the Eye of the Sahara, is a massive circular formation spanning 30 miles in diameter. Concentric rings of raised ridges alternate with valleys, creating a pattern that from above appears remarkably similar to Plato's description of Atlantis's ringed capital city. The structure sits in the Sahara, but during the Ice Age, this region was fertile savanna with rivers and lakes. Climate change transformed it into desert only in the past several thousand years. Archaeological evidence shows human habitation in the Sahara during wetter periods, with rock art depicting animals and pastoral scenes now impossible in the current environment. Geologists explain the Richat structure as an eroded geological dome, layers of rock uplifted and then worn away by wind and water over millions of years, creating the concentric pattern. But some researchers note features suggesting human modification: the precision of the circular pattern, the alignment of certain ridges, and traces of what might be water channels or roads. The structure's size matches Plato's dimensions for Atlantis more closely than any other candidate. Its concentric ring design mirrors his description precisely. Its location places it near the Atlas Mountains, which Plato mentioned as bordering Atlantis, and not far from ancient West African civilizations that could have preserved accounts of its destruction. The archaeological record remains silent. No temples, no harbor works, no metallurgy, no writing. The site would need to have been buried by desert sand, or its structures completely eroded away, leaving only the underlying geological pattern visible. The Antarctica hypothesis represents one of the most controversial theories, requiring complete reinterpretation of ancient maps and Ice Age chronology. The Piri Reis map, drawn by a Turkish admiral in 1513, shows the coast of South America with remarkable accuracy for its time. More controversially, it appears to show the coastline of Antarctica, without ice, in a period when Antarctica's existence wasn't officially known to Europeans. Charles Hapgood analyzed the Piri Reis map and concluded it was compiled from much older source maps, possibly dating back thousands of years to when Antarctica's coast was visible before glaciation. Satellite radar has detected what appear to be geometric features beneath Antarctic ice, patterns too regular to be natural formations. But ice thickness of 2 miles and international treaties protecting Antarctica from extensive drilling make investigation nearly impossible. The few ice core samples taken haven't revealed signs of human habitation, but they cover tiny fractions of the continent's vast area. The Antarctica theory requires accepting Hapgood's crustal displacement mechanism, which mainstream geology rejects. The Piri Reis map's Antarctic coastline could also be explained as misidentification of South American geography or artistic interpretation, rather than accurate mapping of an ice-free Antarctica. The mechanism of destruction offers clues to Atlantis's location. Plato emphasized that earthquake and flood destroyed the island in a single day and night, suggesting sudden catastrophic event rather than gradual submersion. Volcanic eruption provides the most dramatic mechanism for sudden destruction. Santorini proves such events can obliterate island civilizations in hours. Volcanic calderas leave traces: collapsed islands, pumice deposits, ash layers. The Atlantic Ocean floor shows no evidence of volcanic collapse on the scale required for Plato's Atlantis at any location matching his geographic description. Tsunami generated by submarine landslide or meteor impact could produce the devastation Plato described. The Storegga slide off Norway 8,200 years ago created tsunamis over 80 feet high that struck coasts across the North Atlantic. A similar event in the Atlantic could have destroyed coastal settlements while submerging low-lying islands through liquefaction and coastal subsidence. Underwater landslides occur when continental shelf sediments become unstable, triggered by earthquakes, rapid sea level change, or methane hydrate release from warming ocean floors. The end of the Ice Age created perfect conditions for such events. Melting glaciers raised sea levels rapidly, destabilizing coastal slopes. Earthquakes from isostatic rebound, Earth's crust adjusting to removed ice weight, could have triggered massive submarine avalanches. A landslide-generated tsunami striking a low-lying Atlantic island would match Plato's description precisely. The earthquake would be felt first. Minutes later, the wave would arrive, not gradually rising water, but a vertical wall moving at hundreds of miles per hour. The island would be submerged in hours, survivors scattered to distant shores with only memories of what was lost. Crustal displacement, though rejected by mainstream geology, would provide mechanism for sudden submersion of entire land masses. If Earth's crust shifted rapidly, it could explain both catastrophic speed and the difficulty of finding evidence. Ocean depths prevent thorough exploration of most proposed Atlantic locations. The deepest parts of the Atlantic remain less mapped than the surface of Mars. Sonar surveys detect formations, but confirming their nature requires expensive submarine expeditions that rarely receive funding. Desert sand buries potential African sites beneath dunes that shift with every wind. Antarctic ice conceals whatever lies beneath 2 miles of frozen water, protected by international treaty from the drilling required to investigate. The Egyptian priests preserved it in stone. Mesopotamian scribes pressed it into clay. Plato recorded it in careful Greek prose, all describing a civilization destroyed by catastrophic flood and earthquake, all placing it at the end of the Ice Age, all emphasizing sudden destruction and scattered survivors. The location remains uncertain because the evidence lies beyond current reach, beneath ocean depths that crush submarines, under desert sands that bury cities, or frozen under Antarctic ice that's accumulated for millennia. Deep within Vatican City, 53 miles of shelving hold secrets that could rewrite human history. The Apostolic Archives, renamed from Secret Archives in 2019, contain 35,000 volumes of texts dating back over 1,000 years, climate-controlled vaults, restricted access. Researchers must obtain special permission, can request only 3 documents per day, are forbidden from examining materials less than 75 years old. The official explanation: protecting fragile documents, respecting diplomatic privacy. The hidden reason: concealing texts that contradict biblical chronology. In 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa stood in the Yucatan Plaza as flames consumed thousands of Maya codices, books containing astronomical calculations stretching back tens of thousands of years. Historical records of previous world ages destroyed by catastrophes, including floods. Chronologies incompatible with the biblical creation date of 4004 BC. The official reason: eliminating pagan idolatry. The real reason: the texts described civilizations existing before Adam and Eve, floods destroying earlier worlds, cycles of creation and destruction spanning epochs the Bible never mentioned. Only 4 Maya codices survived. The rest, thousands of books containing knowledge accumulated over millennia, turned to ash in a single afternoon. Spanish chroniclers who documented indigenous traditions before their destruction reported accounts matching Plato's Atlantis. Fray Bernardino de Sahagún recorded Aztec histories of 4 previous worlds, each destroyed by catastrophe, with the current 5th sun beginning after a great flood. The parallels to Old World flood myths were too specific to dismiss as coincidence. The Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, formerly the Inquisition, maintained for centuries that questioning biblical chronology constituted heresy. Giordano Bruno burned at the stake in 1600 partly for suggesting the universe was older than biblical timelines allowed. The Church had theological imperatives for suppressing evidence of pre-biblical civilizations. If advanced societies existed before Adam, biblical creation becomes allegory. If catastrophic floods destroyed earlier worlds, Noah's deluge becomes one event among many. The entire framework of Judeo-Christian chronology unravels. What lies in those 53 miles of restricted shelving? Correspondence from missionaries describing indigenous Atlantis accounts, maps copied from ancient sources showing pre-flood coastlines, texts recovered from monasteries containing knowledge suppressed during the Dark Ages. The Vatican has never released a complete catalog. Researchers can examine only materials they specifically request. Impossible to discover documents whose existence isn't already known. In 1881, Pope Leo XIII opened limited access to researchers, but only materials dated after 1198 AD. Everything before that date remains restricted. Why that specific cutoff? Fourth Crusade of 1204 sacked Constantinople, and Crusaders shipped thousands of texts from the Byzantine libraries to Rome. Ancient Greek manuscripts, Egyptian papyri, Persian astronomical tables, maps copied from Phoenician sources showing Atlantic coastlines. What arrived in those shipments that required permanent concealment? The Voynich manuscript sits in Yale's Beinecke Library now, but it passed through Vatican hands for centuries. Written in an unknown language or cipher, illustrated with plants that don't match any known species, astronomical diagrams suggesting knowledge of planetary systems. Carbon dating places the vellum to the early 1400s, but the knowledge it contains, if ever decoded, could predate medieval Europe by millennia. In 2012, journalist Claudio Rendina claimed church officials admitted certain materials would never be released because they would cause problems for the faith. Vatican spokesman denied this but refused to specify which documents remain permanently restricted. The pattern of suppression extends beyond religious institutions to secular organizations wielding similar power over archaeological evidence. In 1885, a New York Times headline shocked readers: "Enormous skeletons found in Minnesota mounds." The article described remains of individuals 7 to 9 feet tall discovered during Smithsonian-supervised excavations. The skeletons were cataloged, photographed, and shipped to Washington for further study. Then they vanished. Official records claim no such remains were ever received. The photographs disappeared. The catalogs were destroyed during a reorganization in the 1950s, the exact period when academic consensus solidified around approved timelines of American prehistory. Newspaper accounts from across the United States describe similar discoveries. The New York Times alone published dozens of articles between 1880 and 1920 reporting giant skeletons found in burial mounds from Minnesota to Ohio to West Virginia, all excavated under Smithsonian supervision, all shipped to Washington, all disappeared from institutional memory. December 20th, 1897, New York Times. Giant skeletons found in Wisconsin mounds, 7 to 9 feet tall. May 4th, 1912, New York Times. Prehistoric giant found in Ohio, 8 feet 4 inches. February 11th, 1902, New York Times. Strange skeletons found. Minnesota excavation reveals remains of 7-foot giants. Not sensationalist tabloids, the newspaper of record. Not anonymous sources. Smithsonian-supervised excavations with named archaeologists and specific mound locations. The Serpent Mound in Ohio. The Cahokia Complex in Illinois. The Poverty Point Earthworks in Louisiana. The 1894 Bureau of Ethnology report documented these findings in official government records. Later editions removed the references. The original report exists in archives but is never cited in modern archaeology textbooks. In 1992, the Smithsonian published an official statement. No evidence of giant skeletons exists in our collections. But Freedom of Information Act requests revealed the institution destroyed thousands of documents related to early American archaeology during the 1950s reorganization. Whatever evidence those documents contained, gone forever. The Smithsonian's suppression extended beyond giants to any evidence challenging approved chronology. For decades, the institution rejected findings suggesting humans arrived in the Americas before 13,000 years ago. Sites like Topper in South Carolina found tools dated to 20,000 years ago. The Smithsonian dismissed them as contaminated or misidentified rocks. Only after overwhelming evidence forced mainstream archaeology to abandon Clovis first did the Smithsonian acknowledge earlier dates. By then, how much contradicting evidence had been discarded? How many careers destroyed for proposing dates the institution refused to accept? Off Cuba's western coast in 2001, sonar pulses revealed something impossible at 2,000 feet depth. Geometric formations. Symmetrical stone structures arranged in patterns suggesting urban planning. Pyramids. Rectangles. Circular formations spread across several square miles. Advanced Digital Communications published the sonar data. Marine engineer Paulina Zalitsky led expeditions using robot submarines to capture video. The footage showed stone blocks with right angles, smooth surfaces, apparent tool marks. For structures to exist at that depth, they would need to have been built when sea levels were 2,000 feet lower, potentially 50,000 years ago or more. National Geographic announced plans for a documentary. The Cuban government offered support. International media covered the discovery. Then silence. National Geographic canceled the documentary without explanation. Cuban government support evaporated. Funding requests were denied. The last survey occurred in 2003. Since then, nothing. The formations remain unexplored. The sonar data dismissed as geological features, the video footage ignored. Why? Because the timeline challenges not just civilization's history, but human cognitive development itself. Evidence of urban planning 50,000 years ago would require rewriting textbooks across multiple disciplines. The Bimini Road, rectangular limestone blocks aligned off the Bahamas, faces similar dismissal. Discovered in 1968, geologist Marshall McCusick declared it natural beach rock in 1970. That became the official position. Researchers arguing for human construction found papers rejected, funding denied, permits refused. Off India's coast, the Gulf of Combat formations detected in 2001 showed grid patterns suggesting cities. India's National Institute of Ocean Technology recovered artifacts including fossilized wood dated to 7500 BC. Investigation stalled. Foreign researchers were denied permits. The site remains unexplored. Japan's Yonaguni Monument, studied for 15 years by marine geologist Masaaki Kimura, who documented carved steps, post holes, right angles too precise for nature, was dismissed by Western archaeology without serious examination. The Japanese government protects it, but refuses archaeological designation, keeping it in legal limbo. In the 1970s, Dr. Virginia Steen McIntyre helped date artifacts from Hueyatlaco, Mexico. 4 different methods: uranium series, fission track, tephra-hydration, geological stratigraphy, all indicated 250,000 years old. Uranium series dating measures radioactive decay in volcanic deposits, reliable to within 10,000 years. Fission track dating counts damaged trails in volcanic glass, independent verification. Tephra-hydration measures water absorption in volcanic ash, third confirmation. Geological stratigraphy places artifacts below volcanic layers dated by all three methods. Fourth verification. Four completely independent techniques. Four consistent results, all indicating 250,000 years. Dr. Harold Mald, USGS geologist on the team, defended the dating until his death. Dr. Roald Fryxell, Washington State University, confirmed the stratigraphy. Both faced professional consequences. Neither recanted. The site was closed in 1973. The artifacts were transferred to Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History. Storage facility in Mexico City. Catalog numbers assigned. No further testing permitted. 52 years later, they remain in boxes, their dating dismissed despite four independent methods producing identical results. The pattern repeats across institutions. Proposed dates challenging mainstream timelines. Papers face rejection before peer review. Argue for advanced Ice Age civilizations. Tenure committees deny promotion. Question approved chronology. Grant applications marked not scientifically rigorous. This doesn't require central conspiracy. It operates through thousands of individual academics protecting reputations, journal editors maintaining paradigm-based standards, grant committees funding research likely to produce acceptable results. The effect is suppression without coordination. Academic journals reject papers challenging established dates. University presses refuse to publish books proposing Ice Age civilizations. Conference organizers decline presentations on underwater structures. Grant committees deny funding for Atlantis research. Network executives kill documentaries taking underwater formations seriously. News coverage of discoveries always features skeptical archaeologists explaining why investigation isn't warranted. Programs about underwater archaeology include narration explaining why nothing significant exists, even when showing footage of formations appearing artificial. The controlled narrative prevents public pressure for investigation. People absorb the message. Atlantis is fantasy. Underwater formations are natural. Established chronology is settled science. The suppression serves overlapping interests. Religious institutions protect biblical chronology. Academic institutions protect theories their reputations are built upon. Government agencies avoid controversy requiring expensive investigations. Media follows editorial policies excluding fringe topics. The result? Consensus reality excluding evidence that challenges approved narratives. But the monopoly on information is cracking. Satellite technology detects anomalies without institutional permission. Crowdfunding bypasses grant committees. Independent researchers publish without peer review gatekeeping. The control is weakening. Yet institutions still determine which sites can be excavated, which artifacts receive analysis, which findings enter the academic record. The Vatican decides what researchers can request from 53 miles of shelving. The Smithsonian controls access to storage facilities holding a century of suppressed evidence. The Cuban government blocks permits for underwater surveys. The Mexican Institute keeps Hueyatlaco artifacts locked away. Until this control breaks, the truth about pre-flood civilizations remains behind institutional walls. But the evidence waits. In climate-controlled Vatican vaults, correspondence from missionaries describing indigenous Atlantis accounts, maps copied from ancient sources, texts recovered from Byzantine libraries showing pre-biblical chronologies. At 2,000 feet off Cuba's western coast, geometric stone formations, pyramids, structures that would require sea levels 2,000 feet lower than today. In Smithsonian storage facilities cataloged as geological samples or misidentified artifacts, the remains that dozens of New York Times articles described between 1880 and 1920. Behind chain-link fences at Hueyatlaco, artifacts dated by four independent methods to 250,000 years old, contradicting every approved timeline of human migration. Plato's Egyptian priests carved it in stone at Sais. The Popol Vuh described 4 previous worlds destroyed by floods. The Sumerian king list recorded antediluvian cities swept away by catastrophe. Indigenous traditions across 6 continents preserved accounts of advanced civilizations destroyed when the Ice Age ended, all describing the same event. The institutions controlling archaeology have spent centuries ensuring this evidence remains fragmented, dismissed, buried beneath official denial. They've succeeded, for now. But suppression cannot last forever. The truth survived the Dark Ages when libraries burned. It survived the colonial period when conquistadors destroyed codices. It persists despite modern dismissal as myth. The question isn't whether Atlantis existed. The question is when institutional walls will crack and what we'll discover when they do. As the night deepens and the weight of these mysteries settles like a gentle tide, let us drift back through the journey we've traveled together. We began in Athens, 360 BC, where Plato recorded words that would echo across 2 millennia. An account of a civilization destroyed in a single day and night, swallowed by waters that rose without mercy. His words were not invention, but history, preserved through Egyptian priests who had maintained records for 9,000 years, carved in stone where the desert sun could not erase them. We walked through temple chambers at Edfu, where inscriptions described Zep-Tepi the first time, when waters swallowed the dwelling places of the ancestors. We stood in the ruins of Nippur, where clay tablets pressed by trembling hands told of Utnapishtim surviving floods that made even the gods cower in fear. We listened to the Vedas speak of Manu and rising waters that covered mountains themselves. We heard the Maya describe resinous rain falling without ceasing until the face of the earth was obscured. All of them remembering the same catastrophe. All of them placing it at the boundary between ages, when one world drowned and another began. The geological evidence confirmed what the ancient texts preserved. Ice cores from Greenland revealing temperatures spiking 15 degrees in a decade. Sediment layers marking the moment when freshwater became saltwater in the Black Sea as the Mediterranean broke through with the force of a waterfall. Continental shelves now beneath 400 feet of ocean. Coastlines where Ice Age populations built their cities, now inaccessible except to sonar pulses that reveal geometric formations in depths where humans shouldn't have been able to reach. We traced the theories across oceans, Santorini's volcanic fury that obliterated the Minoans, the Azores rising from the mid-Atlantic ridge, Cuban formations detected at impossible depths, the Richat structure's perfect concentric rings emerging from Saharan sands. Antarctica's coast appearing on maps drawn before its ice should have been known. Each location matching fragments of Plato's description, yet none containing all the pieces. And we confronted the silence. The institutional walls built around evidence that threatens comfortable narratives. Deep within Vatican City, 53 miles of shelving holding texts that might rewrite human history, access restricted, knowledge concealed, the Smithsonian's vanished giants and destroyed documents, Cuban formations abandoned mid-investigation after funding mysteriously evaporated, academic careers destroyed for proposing dates that challenged approved chronologies, the systematic suppression designed to protect established narratives rather than discover truth. The question was never whether Atlantis existed. The ancient texts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and the Americas all describe the same catastrophe. The geological record confirms massive flooding at the end of the Ice Age. The underwater formations wait in Caribbean depths and off Japanese coasts. The evidence exists, scattered across archives, submerged beneath ocean waters, stored in facilities where artifacts gather dust after being cataloged and forgotten. The real question is whether we possess the courage to investigate properly. whether we can overcome institutional resistance and financial barriers to explore what waits beneath the waves, whether we can pressure institutions to open their archives to reveal what they've stored away, to allow transparent examination of evidence they've spent decades dismissing, whether we can support researchers working outside establishment channels, following evidence wherever it leads rather than wherever funding committees permit. By dismissing these whispers from 9,000 years ago, we lose more than historical accuracy. We lose connection to ancestors who survived catastrophes we can barely imagine, who witnessed the destruction of everything their civilizations had built, who carried forward fragments of knowledge across thousands of miles and thousands of years, determined that future generations would remember what had been lost. Their testimony deserves more than academic contempt. Their warnings echo across the millennia. Yet by opening ourselves to wonder, by considering that the past might be older and stranger and more sophisticated than we've been taught, we gain something irreplaceable. We see our ancestors not as primitive hunter-gatherers stumbling towards civilization, but as survivors of cataclysms, as inheritors of knowledge from drowned worlds, as people who looked at the stars and understood patterns we've only recently rediscovered. The evidence continues emerging despite institutional resistance. Satellite imaging reveals structures hidden beneath jungle canopy and desert sand. Crowdfunding enables independent researchers to explore sites without waiting for grant committees. Internet platforms allow findings to reach public awareness without passing through peer review gatekeepers. The monopoly on historical narrative is weakening, cracks spreading through walls that have stood for centuries. Plato was right. The Egyptian priests were right. The Mesopotamian scribes, the Vedic scholars, the Maya historians, they were right. They remembered what we have spent centuries trying to forget. The world that drowned 9,000 years ago left traces we're only beginning to recognize. In the stillness of this moment, as these ancient voices align across cultures and continents, let the evidence settle in your thoughts like sediment, finding its place at the bottom of ancient seas. As you drift toward sleep, carrying these mysteries with you into dreams, which story resonates most strongly as consciousness begins to fade? Do you see Plato in Athens, recording words that priests in Saces had preserved for 9,000 years? Do you hear the Maya scribes who refused to let their knowledge die even as Spanish fires consumed their codices? Do you feel the weight of those giant skulls shipped to Washington before vanishing into institutional silence? Perhaps you glimpse geometric formations resting 2,000 feet beneath Cuban waters, waiting for courage and funding that might never arrive. Share your thoughts in the comments below when morning returns. Tell us which mystery calls to you across the distance of ages. Let this community of seekers and dreamers know where your curiosity leads. What questions keep you wondering in the stillness between sleep and waking? We've journeyed together through evidence that refuses to stay buried, through mysteries that persist despite centuries of suppression. The search for truth continues in the space between what we've been taught and what the evidence whispers. Rest now, and let these echoes of forgotten worlds guide you into dreams where Atlantis rises from the waves, where temple inscriptions glow with hidden meaning, where the past and future meet in the eternal present of discovery. May these mysteries of civilizations lost to time and rising waters carry you gently into sleep, where the boundaries between myth and memory dissolve, and where truth waits in the depths, patient and timeless as the stars the ancients mapped with impossible precision. Sleep well, traveler. The search continues, the past remembers, and you are part of the discovery.